August 19, 1945. 1,430 hours. Outskirts of Tungu, Burma. The jungle had fallen silent after the storm. Only the drip of rain from the canopies and the faint crackle of distant gunfire fading into surrender. A small group of Japanese women, uniforms soaked and clinging to their skin, stumbled through the muddy trail under the watch of British soldiers. They were not soldiers in the true sense anymore. Nurses, clerks, one cook. Their rifles had been discarded miles back. Now they carried only exhaustion and a white flag made from a torn undershirt. Aiko Tanaka walked near the middle of the line, clutching her satchel as if it still meant duty. Inside were medical records no one would ever read, and a few letters she could not yet bear to destroy. Her hands trembled with the ache of fever and fear. She had seen surrender in the faces of others, but never in her own reflection until now. Rumors had followed them long before capture. That the British humiliated women. That they made you strip and laugh before shooting. That they cut off hair to mark you as shameful. The stories had been told in barracks and whispered in the dark, each version crueler than the last. And as the British patrol herded them down the dirt path toward the field camp, Aiko believed this was how the end of the empire would feel. Not death, but dishonor. The rain stopped as suddenly as it began. Ahead, through the thinning mist, canvas tents rose from the plain like strange white flowers. The camp was alive with motion. Jeeps rattling past, medics moving between stretchers, the faint smell of disinfectant carried on the humid air. Somewhere, someone boiled tea. That smell, foreign yet oddly domestic, twisted in Aiko's chest. "Keep them together," a British voice ordered. Calm, firm, almost weary. The tone struck her. Not hatred, not triumph, merely procedure. They were led into a fenced area beside the medical tent. British soldiers watched, helmets tilted forward, rifles resting lazily. No one jeered. No one even looked too long. Aiko waited for the first insult, the laughter. It didn't come. Then an interpreter, an Indian corporal with kind eyes, approached. "You will be inspected," he said in broken Japanese. "Clothes off. For cleanliness." The words hit her like a slap. She felt her throat tighten, a wave of dread crawling up her spine. The women gasped, clutching their sleeves. One of them whispered, "They will shame us." Aiko's eyes darted toward the British sergeant in charge, a man in his 30s, face sunburnt, uniform crisp despite the heat. His name tag read Bell. He gave no sign of cruelty, just a curt nod toward the medical tent. "Take them through," he said. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of carbolic soap and wet canvas. Buckets of steaming water lined the floor. Behind a hanging blanket, shadows moved. Nurses, not soldiers. British women in white aprons. A nurse pulled the curtain aside. Her hands were gloved, her voice brisk but not unkind. "You'll wash here," she said, motioning to the buckets. Uniforms burned after. "Lice, disease." The interpreter repeated the words, his tone almost apologetic. Aiko froze. Burned? Disease? The room spun with the memory of propaganda posters, Allied devils grinning over captive women. Yet here, the British matron, Margaret Ellis, her badge red, simply pointed to soap, towels, and gowns folded neatly on a bench. No one laughed. No one stared. The first of the women began to undress, trembling. The nurses turned away politely, giving them privacy. When Aiko finally loosened her tunic and it fell heavy to the ground, she expected mockery. Instead, a nurse stepped forward, gently guiding her toward a bucket of warm water. The warmth stung at first, her skin raw, caked in dirt and blood. Then came the smell of soap, sharp and clean. Aiko felt the grime of weeks lift away, streaking the water brown. Her mind couldn't reconcile it. Kindness delivered through such ordinary gestures. Behind her, uniforms were gathered into a heap. A soldier carried them outside and tossed them into a pit fire. Smoke rose into the pale sky, mingling with the damp mist. To Aiko, it looked like a funeral, not for them, but for who they had been. When she stepped out, the matron handed her a hospital gown. White cotton, soft against her bruised shoulders. She expected a snide comment, a sneer. But Margaret only nodded once, professional, unsmiling. "You're safe here," she said quietly, almost to herself. The words made no sense. Safe? In enemy hands? Outside, the women stood together, barefoot in the mud, their old lives turning to ash behind them. The camp was quieter now. Somewhere, an engine idled. A kettle whistled. The smell of tea drifted again through the air, strangely comforting, like something remembered from childhood. Lieutenant Bell emerged from a tent, clipboard in hand. He gave the women a passing glance, not cruel, not tender, simply human. "You'll be moved to the medical ward," he said through the interpreter. "You'll be given rations, deloused, and kept separate. No harm will come to you if you follow orders." Then, as if remembering something, he turned to one of the soldiers. "Bring them tea." It was such an ordinary sentence that no one understood it at first. Aiko blinked, unsure she'd heard right. Moments later, tin mugs were passed around, chipped, steaming, filled with the same liquid she'd smelled earlier. She held it in both hands, watching the rising steam curl into the evening air. The first sip was bitter, foreign. Yet it burned warmly down her throat, dissolving something she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. For the first time since capture, no one shouted, no one pointed a gun. Just the quiet sound of rain returning, tapping gently against the tent roofs. Aiko looked at the matron, at her white apron, her lined face, her steady eyes. "Arigato," she whispered. The matron didn't understand the word. But she smiled faintly, as if she did. In that moment, surrounded by smoke, mud, and the scent of tea, Aiko realized that the humiliation she'd feared had never come. Instead, something far rarer had arrived: decency, disciplined and deliberate, as if the British were determined to prove that mercy itself could be a weapon stronger than revenge. And as the fire burned out behind her, Aiko stood silently in her white gown, unsure whether she felt defeated or freed. The mornings came slow in the camp, each one drenched in mist and the faint smell of wet earth. Aiko rose with the others, folding the hospital gown around her shoulders as though it were armor. The rain had left the ground muddy, but it was cleaner than the jungle trails they had stumbled through, and for that alone, it felt like a small mercy. Inside the tents, nurses moved with quiet efficiency, checking limbs for fever, inspecting hair for lice, distributing clean bandages and rationed tea. Each gesture was deliberate, measured, a protocol that somehow felt humane. Aiko found herself assigned to the medical tent, helping Margaret Ellis and a younger nurse sort supplies. She washed stretchers, handed out clean linen, and organized the shelves of antiseptic and bandages. At first, every motion felt like a performance, a trial to see if she would falter under observation. But the British treated her not as an enemy, but as a patient, a helper, a person. She noticed how they worked: the rhythm of pouring water, folding towels, dipping hands in soap, cleaning wounds. Each action was exact, disciplined, and devoid of malice. It was in this precision that she first began to glimpse an unexpected truth: that order and kindness were not opposites. Tea remained a quiet constant. Served twice daily, in chipped tin mugs, it was the same bitter brew she had first tasted when she arrived. Yet now, it carried a different weight. When she sipped, she watched the steam curl upward, and imagined it carrying away some of the fear lodged deep in her chest. Other women huddled in small clusters, sharing quiet words in Japanese, hesitant at first, then gradually more confident. They compared rationed biscuits, whispered fragments of home, spoke of brothers and fathers whose letters never arrived. Occasionally, they glanced at the British soldiers nearby, startled at their absence of mockery. One afternoon, Aiko was assigned to help a young British private, Lewis, with a minor infection. His hands shook, his face pale beneath the sunburn, yet he offered a small, awkward smile when he saw her approach. Their eyes met, a flicker of recognition passing between them. Two humans, exhausted and weary, tasked with healing. She spoke softly, her English halting. Clean? He nodded, watching her work, a tension in his shoulders easing with every careful motion of her fingers. No words of hatred were exchanged, yet understanding seeped silently into the space between them. Other prisoners murmured unease at these interactions. Some whispered of revenge, of the war that had stolen families, of the boys killed in Burma. Aiko heard the tension in their voices, the dissonance between fear and obligation. Lieutenant Bell, observing quietly, instructed the group with calm authority. Orders are orders. Treat them with decency. We don't need to beat men, or women, to prove we've beaten them. It was a statement that carried weight, both in the camp and within Aiko's mind. Decency, it seemed, could exist amid conflict, and it could coexist with authority. Evenings were different. After the last ration had been distributed and the tents settled into quiet hums of conversation, Aiko and a few women ventured outside. They sat on damp earth, watching the smoke from the morning's fires curl into the dusky sky. One began humming a lullaby from childhood, another joined softly, and soon, the air was filled with quiet Japanese melodies. British soldiers paused in the distance, listening respectfully, never interrupting. The women noticed for the first time that the soldiers were not monsters, that their humanity was intact even here, at the edges of surrender. Margaret presented Aiko with a small towel one day, a gift for her diligence and care. Its fabric was soft and white, a tangible reminder of order and attention amid chaos. Aiko held it carefully, not knowing how to express gratitude in the language of the occupiers, yet feeling the weight of meaning. It was more than a towel. It was recognition, a silent acknowledgement that she, too, could act with care and dignity. Through these micro-moments, Aiko began to reframe her perception. The fear that had gripped her upon arrival slowly ebbed, replaced by a cautious respect. She noticed that discipline and compassion intertwined here, that strict routines were not cruelty but structure, and that kindness could be measured, deliberate, purposeful. There was no grand heroism, no speeches declaring virtue. Just quiet, sustained attention to the welfare of others. And that, she realized, was extraordinary in its own understated way. One night, as she wrote in a makeshift journal, her pen scratching across paper under the flicker of a lantern, she paused. If defeat can be this gentle, what else have we misunderstood? The question lingered in her mind, unspoken aloud, shared only with the blank page. Around her, other women folded clean linen, whispered fragments of remembered songs, and passed the time in small acts of order and care. In the simplicity of these shared duties, the camp became more than a holding place. It became a space where the human soul could breathe, even in captivity. The midpoint of her awakening came in a quiet incident. A wounded soldier grimacing in pain, Aiko's hands steady on his wound. Their eyes met, and for a brief instant, all barriers, language, allegiance, fear, fell away. She saw in him the same exhaustion, the same vulnerability that she felt in herself. The realization that enemies could act with integrity, that humans could exercise mercy even when victorious, settled over her like a soft rain. It was a revelation that reshaped the small universe of the camp, a subtle but seismic shift in understanding. In these days, decency became routine. Soap, clean water, orderly beds, whispered songs, and bitter tea, all mundane, yet all profound. Aiko observed that the smallest gestures carried enormous moral weight. The British nurses never overstepped, the soldiers never mocked. In their restraint, they taught a lesson that no propaganda or rumor could convey. That humanity could survive even amid surrender, that dignity could be maintained without compromise. And in the quiet of the camp, wrapped in a towel gifted by hands that had once seemed alien, Aiko began to see not captors or enemies, but people, flawed, disciplined, human. The fear that had opened her journey, now transformed into understanding. She did not yet feel relief, but she felt possibility. That the war might not only take lives and pride, but also, in unexpected ways, teach them how to preserve it. The morning air was heavy with mist, soft as wool against the damp earth. Dawn seeped slowly over the Burmese plain, painting tents and muddy tracks in pale grey light. Aiko stood among the small group of women, her hospital gown neatly folded at the edges, the towel Margaret had given her wrapped carefully over her shoulders. Today they would leave the camp, transferred to Rangoon for repatriation. There was no parade, no fanfare, only the muted rumble of engines and the distant clatter of supplies being loaded onto trucks. She watched the British medics move with their usual precision, checking stretchers and ration boxes, their faces calm, unreadable. Margaret Ellis approached, carrying a small bundle of folded gowns, each one white and clean, a stark contrast to the ragged uniforms that had been burned weeks ago. "You've done well," Margaret said, her voice quiet, almost a murmur, the words deliberate but unadorned. Aiko bowed slightly, uncertain how to convey gratitude across language, culture, and circumstance. The women filed toward the waiting trucks, each step measured, the mud sucking at their bare feet. The smell of damp earth, smoke, and lingering antiseptic filled the air, a strange perfume of captivity and care intertwined. Private Lewis, stationed nearby, adjusted his helmet and offered a small, tentative nod. Aiko returned it, unsure if it was acknowledgement, farewell, or simply recognition of shared endurance. These small gestures had become heavier with meaning than any ceremony could provide. Inside the trucks, the women huddled together. The seats were hard, the metal cold beneath them, but they were clean. For the first time since capture, Aiko allowed herself to feel the faint stirring of hope. The camp, with its ordered routines, steaming tea, and quiet compassion, had transformed her fear into understanding. Yet there remained the residue of war. The loss of home, the memories of comrades and family, the gnawing awareness of what had been taken. Aiko reached into her satchel and retrieved a small notebook, its pages filled with half-formed thoughts, sketches of the camp, and broken English sentences. Carefully, she wrote a note. "You wash away not only dirt. You wash away hatred." She left it folded neatly inside a tin cup and placed it on Margaret's desk before departing, a silent testament to the lessons she had learned. It was not a declaration, nor an apology, simply recognition that mercy, even in war, left traces that could not be erased. The trucks rumbled toward the main road. Outside, the sun pierced the mist in thin, pale shafts, turning raindrops on leaves into shards of light. The women watched silently, the smoke from the camp's morning fires curling upward behind them, mingling with the mist. That fire had once symbolized loss, burned uniforms, the remnants of identity and pride, but now it carried a different meaning: cleansing, transition, and quiet rebirth. Inside the vehicle, Aiko's thoughts returned to the British soldiers she had come to know. Lieutenant Bell, ever composed, had shown that authority could be firm without cruelty. Margaret, with her calm efficiency, had demonstrated that care need not be weak. Private Lewis had revealed the fragility hidden beneath uniformed faces, and in their interactions, Aiko had discovered a truth that had eluded her in the chaos of war: that humanity could persist even in the midst of surrender and defeat. By midday, the convoy approached Rangoon. The city loomed through the haze, its streets scarred by conflict, its air thick with dust and distant smoke. The women were tired, but no longer trembling with dread. Fear had transformed into respect, understanding, and a quiet awareness of shared vulnerability. They had been stripped of their uniforms and their expectations of cruelty, but they had not been stripped of their dignity. When the truck stopped, Aiko stepped down first. She hesitated, looking back at the camp one last time, at the orderly tents, the white gowns, the medics and soldiers who had held steadfast to decency when all else was fractured. She folded her hands, a gesture of reverence, and bowed. Margaret returned the bow, the gesture breaking the rigid lines of military formality, an acknowledgement of moral courage across cultures and ranks. Private Lewis raised his tin mug of tea in silent salute. Aiko mirrored the action, the faint warmth of remembrance rising in her chest. The tea, once bitter and foreign, had become a symbol of continuity, of small rituals holding immense meaning. It had marked fear, understanding, and finally, the affirmation that mercy could outlast conflict. As the women were led into the repatriation center, Aiko carried the towel carefully, feeling its weight like a talisman. She imagined the journey home, uncertain and fraught, yet tempered by the knowledge that even in war, people could choose restraint over vengeance, care over cruelty. The camp had been a crucible, burning away assumptions and fear, and in the quiet aftermath, something human and resilient had emerged. Years later, Aiko would open a small tea tin in her Tokyo apartment. Inside lay the towel, folded neatly, still faintly smelling of antiseptic and rain. She traced her fingers along its worn edges, remembering the morning mist, the smoke from the burned uniforms, the quiet offering of tea, and the steady hands that had guided her through the most fragile moments of surrender. It was not a relic of defeat, but a reminder of the profound power of ordinary decency. History recorded who had won the war. Battles, treaties, and territorial lines filled books and museums. But Aiko understood another truth, one not captured by maps or medals: that even in the shadow of conflict, mercy could endure. That discipline could coexist with compassion. That dignity could survive surrender. In the quiet of her apartment, she whispered the words she had once written in her journal. History remembered who won. But humanity remembers who showed mercy. Outside, the city hummed with life. The past remained etched in memory, but in her hands, the towel, the tea tin, the faint scent of rain, all spoke of a different victory, quieter, yet eternal.